You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time, money, effort into working on their habitat for deer, wildlife in general. And, you know, they really have no other barometer on how they're doing other than how much they spend and how much time they work into something. And someone could say, man, we're always out on the land, we're always working, we're spending a lot of money doing so we must be doing a good job. And what I find, unfortunately, a pretty good parallel is the more you spend, the more work you do on your property, the worse you are and the lower your results. And there's a good reason for that. And one of the things I like to offer you is a checkup for how you're doing. How's your whitetail management, your habitat management? How is it really doing? Because just because you spend a lot of money, just because you spend a lot of time, doesn't equal success. You know, there's a lot of people that you can think of, you know, baseball players, professional baseball players. If they make a lot of money, they spend a lot of money on hunting, and they might have 1,000 acres here, 2,000 acres there. And I'm talking about the ones that made a lot of money in the game. But does that necessarily translate into a great amount of success? You know, there's some people that need 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres to do really well on their hunt. And there's some people that could do great with 200 acres, 50 acres in the same area. And it doesn't necessarily equate to dollars spent at all. And so I want to offer you a checkup. There's people around here that have 900 acres, 1,500 acres, 1,100, 2,400 acres. And they don't necessarily do better than some of the people that have smaller acreages. And again, just because you're spending that money, I want to offer a realistic checkup for you. And part of that comes into, there's a few ways to look at this. You know, the number of mature bucks that you see during the daylight versus nighttime, for example. That ratio should be 1 to 1 or better, meaning during the hunting season. Who cares about the summertime? Who cares about the winter? But October, November, December, how many mature bucks do you see in and around daylight versus those that you see that are totally nocturnal? That ratio should be 1 to 1 or better, meaning in good circumstances, like we do in Wisconsin, we see more mature bucks during the daylight than we do at night because they're elsewhere at night and they're coming back onto the property or through the property during daylight. That's the best case scenario. But if you start to see that you're seeing 5 mature bucks at night versus 1 during the day, you're doing a bad job. That's just the bottom line. But I want to go even take it a step further. You know, it involves mature bucks because those are our best barometer of how we're doing in the area. You know, I've been on properties before, clients that I go out to, and their neighbors are seeing mature bucks. They're shooting the 200-incher, the 180, the 170, and they haven't even seen a buck like that in 2 years. And what happens is you develop a property that is so nocturnal that deer don't recognize your property. I should back up, not deer, because does, fawns, young bucks, they can get used to that level of pressure. But a mature buck outgrows that. He wants to find an area where it's actual mature buck property, and he leaves and goes and finds it, and you don't see those bucks. And after a while, not only does he develop a reputation that your property is a nocturnal property when he's 3 years old, but when he's 4, and by the time he gets to 5 or 6, if he gets that old in your area, he doesn't even go to your property anymore because it's so far outside of his daylight loop, he doesn't want to be on your property. So for that, you might get a random picture middle of the night in October of that buck or November. And you know he's there. And you say, man, I don't recognize that buck. I want to ask you, what's your percentages of overall mature bucks that you see on your land during the entire hunting season that are random bucks? How many bucks do you see that you don't recognize? Because the higher that number, the more randoms you see, the more bucks you don't recognize in any way that come through, the worse off you're doing on your land. It's a great barometer for your land. I heard a deer management group, they talked about that 50% of all your bucks or something like that should be random bucks on your property. Unfortunately, they don't get to experience high quality properties. Because what we find is less than 10% of the bucks that you see, especially those mature bucks, those 4 and 5 and 6-year-old bucks, and I would say even on well-managed properties, even 5% or less, the best managed properties, are going to be random bucks. They're always going to be bucks you recognize. Well, how do you destroy that? Because it's so easy. Well, we're standing on a small hunting plot right here, and this is just a good example of how we do that. This hunting plot, we get a good snapshot of daylight or around daylight movement of mature bucks in here. We had bow on here last year. We had 45 in here. We had bucks that were in here during the daylight, but we can't destroy that. And a lot of times it boils back down to your food sources. But it's not just that. If we're spooking deer on a small food plot like this, or a large one, it has a ripple effect. So we extend 200 yards that way in every direction. we start to establish a perimeter around this small little food plot. If they don't want to hit this during the daylight, they don't want to be there 200 yards away, 150 yards away. It's not that they just stand back there 10 yards away and say, well, I'll stay here, but I'll never go there during the daylight. This has to be a part of their daylight movement. And if this isn't, everything's destroyed. So if you're not getting a picture of them here during the daylight and you're spooking them out because you're over hunting this location, you're walking through here, you're blowing your scent into this location, they can hear you walking by, then you're not going to get a picture of them on a water hole 100 yards away, even though a water hole is a much lower level of risk to a mature buck. But why is he going to hit that 100 yards over there if he doesn't feel comfortable in this location? So it all works together. And that's why we have mock scrapes at all our stand locations. We want to see those mature bucks hitting those mock scrapes during the daylight at all the stand locations. If we don't, we need to ask ourselves, do we need to change in access? Is a stand location too loud when we're getting it out? We use, again, high quality family tradition stands are very quiet. USA steel, USA made in Charlotte, Michigan. Very high quality, they don't make noise when you get in and out. Are you being haphazard about buckles, snaps, Velcro when you get into your stands? But it all boils back down to, we need all our stands working for us during the daylight, high percentage of daylight, mature bucks, and we need all our food sources. Again, I say this all the time, but you're better off spooking deer 200 yards away in a bedding area than you are on a food source like this. Because if we spook deer on this food source, they're not going to be in those bedding areas during the daylight. So it all boils back to the anchor of this small food source. Your access in and out of your land, be very critical. Because if you're spooking deer on the way in and out of your land, if you're spooking deer out of your stand locations, if you have blinds that you put right in the middle of this food plot and you get in and out and you can't help but spook deer getting in and out, then guess what? You're going to see a lot of random bucks. You're not going to recognize them because they're hardly relating to your land during the daylight. And if they're not relating to this during your daylight, they're not relating to that stand, that morning stand, that water hole stand, that mock scrape stand, that cruising stand, inside corner. Why are they there if they're not in one other location either? So you need to look at all your stand locations. They all need to be daylight movement stand locations. Now, of course, you're going to have mature bucks that cheat to one side or the other, maybe more depth of cover, where they can go further back into the cover and call their place their own. The bottom line is, if you're not seeing at least 80 to 90% bucks that you recognize in your land every single fall, there's a lot of major changes that need to be made. And a lot of it boils back down to your food sources. We talk about that all the time. You know, this little hunting plot here, how do we get away with this being a daylight plot and not spooking deer and not contributing to getting a lot of random bucks? Because if we overhunt this, again, it's going to push our percentage down of how many bucks we actually recognize on the land, because we're going to keep bucks off this property. This right here, very thick hedgerow on the back. We could expand this food plot. We could expand, probably add another 1/8 of an acre, 1/4 acre on this top side. But we'd have to destroy this cover. And then we have a switchgrass layer on the outside of this. So we have switchgrass on the outside, then we have a thick brush layer, and then we have the food plot in here. We have bedding area right in here. We hold deer tight to this food plot. When we get into the blind, you can see the redneck back there. It's really hard to see. Deer never look at it because it's really hard to see. It's on the back side of the cedar tree, not the front side. That makes it a little harder to shoot. We have this window right here and we have that window over there. So it makes it a little bit harder to hunt, but we can't sacrifice the ease of hunting for the chance and risk of spooking deer and making our buck sightings more random on the property. But we have to consider everything that we do on this small little hunting plot for access, enter and exit into a stand location, making sure we're not spooking deer. No different than that water hole that's about 150 yards over there. We have it switchgrass lined. It's on a cruising bench. We don't expect bedding right there. We haven't created bedding. We've created bedding right here. We've created bedding on the other side 150 yards. So we're in that window between 150 yards bedding area this way and this way. And then switchgrass lined on the outside for about 20 to 30 feet wide, so we can actually get into that stand. We only walk in the woods 10 yards. This we're walking in 3 feet into the edge of the cover, basically, before we actually hunt it. So you have to consider that at every stand location, your access, your entrance, and not spooking deer anywhere you can, especially in these food sources. They're the number one. You're attracting deer to a high attractive food plot only to spook them away. You have to have that diversity here that lasts the entire season. When you do that, then bucks relate to this. They're not going somewhere else. When you spread deer around your property and the use and they feel comfortable, then not only do you spread your efficiency around in your parcel and you make the most use of your acres, but you also, again, it boils back down to that you actually get pictures of a very high percentage of the bucks. And not only are they using your land, but in the entire area. Because I look at it like, you know, a property like this is 245 acres. We're going to get pictures of about 45 to 50 different antlered bucks throughout the season. And we're going to have one or two that we don't recognize, probably in middle-aged one. The older bucks we recognize. Very rarely do we get one that's older than 3 or 4 that we don't recognize. Very, very small percentage. So we're going to be able to get a good look at all these bucks. We're going to know these bucks. But those bucks aren't just reflective of living on this land. You know, a large percentage of those bucks, a third of them, are only here a week or two here and there, a few days here and there, but we recognize them, we know when they're coming on. A lot of times middle of the rut or late season food source. And then we have those bucks that are here all the time. That's about a third, you know, in and around the property. And then we have those bucks, about a third of them, that are here for a month. Then they're gone, then they come back. They're kind of those intermediate bucks. So by the time you add up all those antlered bucks, you can have a lot. We get about 30 to 35 different antlered bucks on 40 acres in Wisconsin. But it's because we take the steps at every stand location, water hole, food source, cruising, whatever it might be, backside of bedding, to not spook deer. And when you do that and you have an effective hunting plan, it's a great way to give yourself a checkup right now, looking back for last year and kind of thinking back. You should have, if you're doing a great job, you should have 90% or higher of all the bucks that you get a picture of or see in person that you recognize each and every fall. And when you do that, you'll accomplish great things on your land. And that tells me and tells anyone else that knows what they're doing in the habitat industry and hunting industry that you're doing a great job. And that's what I want for each and every one of you, because it's a lot of fun when you can recognize. Take some of the guesswork out. You put trail cameras out. People say, well, there's big bucks there, we're just not seeing them. No, if you're not seeing them, they're probably not there. But if you have stand locations, you're not spoiling, and it's all of them on the entire property, they're all in play, you're going to get an incredibly high percentage of all the bucks in the area on camera. And not only are you going to have a great hunt and have the ability to create a great herd, but it's a lot of fun. And I hope you have a great hunt this fall and a lot of fun hunting this fall and getting a high percentage of all the bucks in the area on your land this hunting season. Now, I don't know if you've checked out our main website lately, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, but we've really had a lot going on, including hats, books, our web class, and certainly our new seed company, WHS Wildlife Blends. When you click on seed on our site, it'll take you right to our brand new site for the seed company. We have all 12 blends available. So check it all out though. I encourage you, I appreciate you checking it out. Whether you buy anything or not, really appreciate you visiting the site and seeing what's going on, and continue to watch because we have big things coming later this year.